Okay, gang, this is Mr. Lepage. We're going to actually work with Aviary. It's been a little bit since we've worked on this, but we're going to come back to it. I've already given you a web video on an introduction to what Aviary is, and you answered some questions that's there. But for the most part, we're actually going to do a lab assignment right here. I'm actually going to go to the Aviary website at aviary.com, and I am going to go ahead and log in using my login name. And I hope that through that introduction you went ahead and you actually created a login for yourself for Aviary. I am going to go under my login name. I'm going to go to my dashboard right here. So here's the dashboard for Aviary. This is kind of the general screen that you're going to see when you log in. And I just kind of want to quickly show you down here. There is an image down here of something that I've created. This is actually what you're going to create down here, which has the green sphere and the red sphere, and it has a little bit of a blur going. So in order to start creating that, I need to load the image editor, which again, as you remember, in Aviary is called Phoenix. I go ahead and click on that. Up comes the image editor. Let me resize here a little bit so you can see it on your screen. Here's the image editor, and we're ready to go. I've got the welcome kind of dialog box here. I can either load one or start from scratch. For this particular instance, we are going to start from scratch. 625 by 625 is fine. And this is in pixels, by the way. I click on background color and I say select color. Currently it's white, but you actually have the option to choose whatever color you'd like. I'm going to keep with white, and I'm going to click on the create button. Just for the purposes of this screen, I am going to shrink. You'll see my measurements up here. It is definitely 625. In order to do the widescreen mode, I can't see the 625 below, so I'm going to shrink this down to about 80%. There's my view slider, and you'll see that will shrink the viewing surface down. Am I at 625 just yet? Let's go a little bit more. Let's go to 60%. Actually, we'll go back up to 70 or so. Yeah, 80% is good. You see the majority of my picture here if I scroll down. So good to go. You don't have to do that on yours. You'll see your full 625 by 625 screen, so you should be good to go there. Over here you'll see I've got a layers palette, very similar to Photoshop. If you look down through the buttons, you'll notice that you have a new layer button. You've got a group layer button, which is similar to a link on Photoshop, link layers. We've got lock unlock layers, which is pretty cool, and then you've got your effects, which is your layer styles in Photoshop, and finally your trash. You've got an options menu here as well that will allow you to switch over to other programs found within the Aviary suite. You've got some mask layers. Pretty powerful program here in terms of it. This company offering it for free. So in any case, that'll give you an idea as to the layers palette. We've got blend mode. Alpha and opacity are the same, or opacity, however you want to say it, but those are the same exact things. Your alpha channel and your opacity are the same exact thing from Photoshop. And you got your blend modes here as well, which Aviary does offer some blend modes, not as much as Photoshop, but in any case, you got your blend modes there, and we'll mess around with those too as well. So first things first, what you're going to realize is when you open up a file in Aviary, it does not name the background. So we're going to go ahead, and here's this first layer that it comes up with. I'm going to double click where it says Untitled 1, and I'm going to name that background. So there's my background. I need to add a layer because we're going to add some shadows here to create that shadow effect for each of the spheres. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on the new layer button. Up comes another layer, and I'm going to double click on the layer name, and I'm going to rename the layer here. We're going to call that shadow. So we're going to add a couple of spheres here on this layer, which will again give the user, the viewer, an illusion of 3D spheres sitting on their shadows. I'm going to create the shadows by going over to the rectangular shape. Notice, very similar to Photoshop, you have all these tools here that the icons, believe it or not, look very similar to the Photoshop icons. I'm going to go down to the rectangular shape, and I'm going to click on it, and you'll see the submenu that appears giving you all these shape options. We're going to go ahead and click on the elliptical shape, and you've got a line weight marker that's here, but I also have the availability to change anything that I want about this elliptical shape I'm about to create. I'm going to click on the black foreground color, and it pulls up the color picker. And basically I'm in black already, but what I want to do is I don't want it to be black. I want it to be a gray color. So I'm going to change the alpha number here to 50%, which basically means that I am using solid black as the color, but you're only seeing 50% of the black, which gives you the gray effect. And I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And what I'm going to do is, once I've got my gray in here, I'm going to draw two ellipses. One is going to be a little bit smaller, and it's going to be over here to the left side, about halfway down. So I'm going to draw that one. Then I'm going to draw a bigger one a little bit further down the image, offset from the first one that I've drawn. So I've got my two shadows. And in order to make them shadows, or look like shadows, they look pretty solid in nature, so they kind of just look like gray ellipses right now. But if I can blur the edges of these gray ellipses, it'll give it that shadowy feel. So I'm still on the shadow layer. I want to click on the Layer Filters button down here below, and up will pull up this screen. Move that over to the left so you can see at least one of the circles. What we're going to do is, you may think it's a shadow, but in essence what I'm going to use is the blur. You'll see what happens to this in a quick second. I am going to blur the X value, which tends to be more of the horizontal value, a lot more than I'm going to blur the Y, which is that vertical value. You'll see what I mean in a second. Go ahead and type in 40 for the blur on X and 10 for the blur on Y. And as you click on those two blur values and change those, you'll notice that from left to right, which is that X value on these, it's blurred a lot more than it is from the top to the bottom. So you can understand what that difference in number creates. It gives you that more of that blur illusion. So there we go. I've got my shadow blur on each one. We are going to go ahead and we're going to create our first sphere. And we're going to use a gradient to give it, again, more of a 3D effect. So want a new layer. And I'm going to rename the layer. So I double click on the layer name. And we're going to call this Red Sphere. So the first one's the red sphere, and I make sure I'm on the red sphere layer. I am going to grab, for this particular case, I'm going to do it with a selection instead of creating a shape. The reason we're doing a selection is I have in the back of my mind I'm going to add a gradient to this thing. So to do a gradient on a shape is a little bit more difficult, so it's a lot easier to do it on a selection. So I'm going to click the elliptical selection. Not going to worry about the feather piece. And I'm going to hold the control key down, and what you'll notice is Aviary has the same kind of control clicks on the keyboard as Photoshop does. If I hold down the control key, I go up to the top left of the big circle and I start creating a sphere, you'll notice it ends up being a perfect circle. That's what holding down the control key does. I am going to make it roughly as big as the shadow, as wide as the shadow, and I'm going to let go of both buttons. Notice it's not exactly in the middle, so I'm going to click right in the middle. I'm still on my selection tool. I'm going to click right in the middle of the selection, and I'm going to move the selection over so that it hovers over the gray shadow underneath it. Same idea as Photoshop 2 as well. You've got the shimmering selection idea. Keep that going, and what we're going to do is we're going to add a gradient to this sphere. I'm going to move over to the paint bucket. Similar to Photoshop, the gradient and the paint bucket are tied together on these tools. I click on the paint bucket, and my eyedropper is there, which we kind of messed around with Photoshop, but there's also the gradient fill tool in the middle. I click on that, excuse me, and here's the gradient tool that I'm going to use. You've got a color scheme below here. I've got black on one side and white on the other. So technically this gradient is going to go from black to white right now. I'll talk about these two types in a second. What I do want to do for this particular case is I want to add a third color here in the middle. So I want it to go from white to a second color to black, and all I have to do is click anywhere in between the two triangles and I can add a third color marker. Now I want to change that color, so I don't want it black, so I'm gonna double click on that marker, and it's going to give you the color picker back up. And what I want you to do is grab as bright a red as you can get. If you want to make sure, here's the web color trigger, you can kind of make sure you're going to get as bright a red as you can. I'm going way to the top right, and I'm going to click OK there, and your middle marker will turn to red. So now I go from white to red to black on the gradient. Down below you'll see the gradient type, and these are very similar to the Photoshop gradient types you have when you pull up your gradient tool in Photoshop. So The one I want is radial. And if you remember correctly, the radial creates a gradient from the inside, the center of the image out. So that's kind of the one I want. The spread method, I'll get into a little bit later. Using the pad spread method is probably the best way to work right now. So keep it on pad. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to go up to the top, roughly the top left third of the ball, right where my paint bucket is. I want you to push down on the mouse button, and I want you to drag down to the bottom right corner, push off the selection just a little bit by about ½ inch or so, and then let go. And basically what that allows you to do is to create that gradient from white to black, which creates a kind of a lighting illusion, like a spotlight on the ball, which is going to give you a little bit more of that 3D illusion. So I'm good to go. I've got my red ball going here with the gradient. I'm going to go up to select, and I am going to say select none, which is similar to Photoshop called deselect. Select none, and there's my red ball. I'm going to stop right there. On part 2, we're going to put up a green ball, and we're going to add some blurring effects and layer effects to those.